Prague Castle began not as the vast architectural complex seen today, but as a strategic stronghold rising above the bends of the Vltava River. In the late 9th century, this elevated ridge offered more than a commanding view. It provided natural defence, control over river routes, and a symbolic sense of authority over the surrounding lands. The choice of this location reflects a deliberate understanding of geography and power in an era when political survival depended on visibility and defensibility. Around the year 880, the foundation of the fortress was initiated under the rule of Bohemian I, a ruler associated with the early formation of Bohemian statehood. At this stage, the site was not a castle in the later medieval sense, but a fortified settlement composed of earthworks, wooden structures, and defensive embankments. Its primary role was to serve as a secure seat of authority, capable of withstanding both internal unrest and external threats in a fragmented Central European landscape. The early fortress also carried a strong spiritual dimension. Bohemian's reign coincided with the gradual Christianization of Bohemia, and the establishment of a sacred space within the fortified area reinforced the link between rulership and divine legitimacy. The presence of early churches transformed the site into more than a military refuge. It became a place where political power and religious identity were woven together, shaping the moral and symbolic framework of early Bohemian society. As the stronghold developed, it functioned as the nucleus of governance for the emerging Přemyslid realm. Administrative decisions, ritual gatherings, and dynastic ceremonies were centered here, giving the site a permanence that distinguished it from temporary tribal seats. Over time, this continuity helped stabilize authority in a region marked by shifting alliances and contested borders, turning the fortress into a fixed reference point for rule and tradition. The ruling family behind this transformation, the Přemyslid dynasty, used the fortress to assert long-term control over Bohemia. Their investment in the site signaled an intention to rule not merely through force, but through institutional presence. Each generation reinforced the importance of the location, gradually replacing wooden defences with more durable structures and embedding the fortress deeper into the political consciousness of the region. By the end of the 9th century, the hilltop settlement had already outgrown its original function. What began as a defensive outpost had evolved into the central stage of Bohemian power, shaping the future expansion of Prague itself. The early fortress laid the groundwork for centuries of architectural growth and political continuity, establishing a pattern in which authority, faith, and landscape remained inseparably linked. The transformation of Prague Castle was not only architectural, but deeply ideological. As the earliest churches rose within the fortified grounds, the meaning of the site began to shift. What had once been defined primarily by defense, ritual tradition, and pre-Christian customs gradually took on a new identity, shaped by Christian belief and institutional faith. The construction of early church buildings, particularly simple rotundas with thick walls and circular plans, introduced a new sacred geometry to the landscape. These structures were modest in scale, yet powerful in symbolism. Their placement inside the stronghold sent a clear message. Spiritual authority was now embedded at the very centre of political power, no longer separate from it. This architectural shift reflected a broader transformation within Bohemia itself. Christianity was no longer confined to missionary activity or elite conversion, but was being anchored physically into the land. By establishing permanent churches at the seat of power, the ruling elite helped normalize the new faith and present it as the natural foundation of social order. The castle thus became a stage for visible, religious change. Pagan rituals tied to open spaces, ancestral memory and natural landmarks were gradually replaced by Christian liturgy conducted within stone walls. Bells, crosses, and sacred interiors reshaped daily rhythms and reoriented communal identity toward a universal faith rather than local tradition. These early churches also served political ends. Christian symbolism strengthened dynastic legitimacy by aligning rulers with a wider Christian world beyond Central Europe. The castle's sacred buildings connected Bohemian authority to broader networks of clergy, learning, and diplomacy, reinforcing its place within the emerging Christian map of Europe. Over time, the fortified hilltop ceased to be merely a refuge or seat of power. It became a visible declaration of religious transformation, where stone and belief reinforced one another. The presence of churches within the stronghold permanently altered the spiritual landscape, ensuring that faith and rulership would develop together from that point forward. During the medieval centuries, Prague Castle underwent a decisive transformation as it became the permanent seat of Bohemian kings. This shift marked a new phase in which rulership was no longer itinerant or provisional, but anchored to a fixed and increasingly monumental centre. The castle's role expanded beyond defence, turning into the core of dynastic authority and state governance. As royal power consolidated, the physical form of the castle changed accordingly. New palaces, halls, and fortifications were added, each reflecting the growing ambitions of the monarchy. Stone replaced earlier materials, and architectural scale became a tool of representation, projecting permanence, legitimacy, and control to both subjects and rivals. The presence of the king reshaped daily life within the complex. Court officials, nobles, clerics, and servants filled its courtyards and chambers, transforming the castle into a living political organism. Decisions affecting the entire realm were issued from its halls, making the site synonymous with authority rather than merely its symbol. Royal ceremonies further enhanced the castle's status. Coronations, diplomatic receptions, and legal assemblies reinforced its role as the stage on which power was displayed and negotiated. These rituals were carefully choreographed within architectural spaces designed to emphasize hierarchy, tradition, and continuity. The castle's growing prestige also reflected the broader stabilization of the Bohemian realm. As borders became more defined and governance more structured, the residence of the king served as a fixed point of order in a changing medieval world. Its expansion mirrored the increasing complexity of royal administration and the need for a central seat capable of sustaining it. The 14th century marked a dramatic turning point for Prague Castle, as it became the focal point of imperial ambition under the rule of Charles IV. No longer content with a regional authority, he envisioned Prague as a true imperial capital, capable of rivaling the great cities of Europe. The castle was reshaped to reflect this vision, not only as a royal residence, but as a visible centre of empire. Gothic architecture became the language through which this ambition was expressed. Vertical lines, pointed arches, and monumental proportions transformed the castle skyline, signalling a new era of confidence and expansion. These architectural choices were not decorative alone. They communicated power, order, and divine favour in stone, aligning rulership with both heaven and history. At the heart of this transformation stood St. Vitus Cathedral, conceived as more than a place of worship. Its scale and complexity were intended to rival the great cathedrals of Western Europe, asserting Prague's place within the sacred geography of Christendom. Construction began as a long-term imperial project designed to outlast its founder and embody dynastic continuity. The cathedral also carried deep political meaning. As the site for royal coronations, relics, and burials, it bound spiritual authority directly to the ruling house. By placing this monumental structure within the castle complex, imperial ideology was embedded into daily governance, ensuring that faith and power were visually and ritually inseparable. Surrounding buildings evolved in harmony with this vision. Palaces, chapels, and fortified elements were reconfigured to support a ceremonial court life befitting an emperor. The castle became a carefully staged environment where architecture guided movement, reinforced hierarchy, and elevated the ruler's presence through space and scale. Through these transformations, the castle ceased to be merely a seat of kingship and became an imperial statement carved into the city itself. Gothic grandeur was not an artistic trend here, but a deliberate expression of authority, ambition, and legacy, shaping Prague into a capital that spoke the language of empire. Under the rule of the House of Habsburg, Prague Castle entered a new phase shaped by Renaissance ideals and imperial administration. Power was no longer expressed solely through medieval symbolism or Gothic monumentality, but through order, proportion, and classical harmony. The castle began to mirror a changing political culture that favoured centralised rule and refined representation. Renaissance influences altered both the appearance and function of the complex. Courtyards were regularised, facades softened, and interiors redesigned to emphasise symmetry and comfort. These changes reflected a shift in elite taste, moving away from the vertical drama of Gothic forms towards spaces suited for administration, ceremony, and courtly life rather than purely defensive needs. This architectural transformation was closely tied to political restructuring. As the Habsburgs expanded their authority, the castle became a key administrative hub within a growing imperial system. Offices, archives, and residential quarters for officials multiplied, turning the complex into a working centre of governance rather than a symbolic royal stronghold alone. The Renaissance style also conveyed ideological intent. Classical elements suggested continuity with the legacy of Rome, reinforcing claims of universal authority and lawful rule. By reshaping the castle in this language, the Habsburgs visually aligned their power with imperial tradition, stability, and rational order at a time of religious tension and political consolidation. Court culture further reshaped the space. Art collections, scholarly pursuits, and ceremonial display became central to life within the castle, particularly during periods when Prague served as an imperial residence. Architecture provided the backdrop for diplomacy and intellectual exchange, signalling that power was now exercised through culture and administration as much as through force. Through these changes, the castle adapted to a new political reality. Renaissance forms did not erase its past, but layered it with new meanings, reflecting an empire increasingly governed by bureaucracy, centralized authority, and cultivated image. The complex thus became a physical record of transformation, where evolving tastes and political priorities were written directly into stone. The long era of confidence surrounding Prague Castle was severely tested by the upheavals of early modern warfare. As large-scale conflicts swept across Central Europe, the castle found itself drawn into struggles that reshaped political borders and exhausted imperial resources. Its role shifted from ceremonial centre to vulnerable stronghold in an age defined by prolonged violence. military occupation and repeated sieges left visible scars across the complex. Defensive structures were stressed beyond their limits, interiors were stripped of furnishings, and artworks were removed, damaged, or lost. Spaces once designed for courtly display and administration were repurposed for soldiers, storage, and survival, altering their character and atmosphere. Fire proved as destructive as armed conflict. Blazes triggered by fighting or neglect spread through sections of the castle, weakening roofs, collapsing halls, and leaving entire wings unusable. The destruction was not always immediately repaired, as attention and funding were diverted to war efforts elsewhere in the empire. As conflict dragged on, neglect became a defining feature. Without consistent royal presence or investment, maintenance declined and repairs were postponed indefinitely. Grand halls that had once hosted ceremonies and audiences fell into disuse, their scale now emphasizing emptiness rather than authority. The castle's changing condition mirrored a deeper political shift. Power was increasingly exercised from other imperial centers, leaving Prague with reduced influence. The physical decay of the complex reflected this loss of centrality, turning architecture into a silent record of diminishing importance. By the time stability slowly returned, the castle no longer projected unquestioned dominance. Its damaged walls and abandoned spaces stood as reminders of an era when imperial confidence had faltered. What had once symbolized ascendancy now conveyed endurance amid decline, awaiting a future redefinition of purpose and meaning. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Prague Castle underwent a deliberate architectural redefinition. The focus shifted from medieval complexity and Renaissance restraint toward Baroque clarity, movement, and controlled grandeur. This transformation was not cosmetic but ideological, designed to reassert authority after decades of instability and conflict. Baroque planning introduced a stronger sense of order across the complex. Axial layouts, balanced courtyards, and carefully aligned facades imposed visual discipline on spaces that had evolved unevenly over centuries. Architecture now guided the eye and the body, directing movement toward focal points intended for ritual and display. Ceremony became central to the castle's renewed identity. Grand staircases, expansive halls, and formal approaches were designed to frame processions and official appearances. These spaces transformed power into performance, ensuring that authority was experienced physically through scale, rhythm, and controlled perspective. Symmetry served as a political language. Repetition and balance suggested stability, hierarchy, and permanence at a time when rulers sought to project calm strength. Baroque design communicated that power was not improvised but structured, continuous, and divinely sanctioned. Interior spaces were equally transformed. Rich ornamentation, frescoes, and sculptural programs reinforced imperial ideology through imagery and symbolism. Mythological scenes, allegories of rule, and religious motifs worked together to present authority as both historic and inevitable. Through these renovations, the castle reclaimed its role as a ceremonial centre of empire. Baroque architecture did not erase earlier layers, but unified them under a new visual order, converting the complex into a stage where imperial power was carefully composed, displayed, and reinforced through space itself. The political meaning of Prague Castle shifted dramatically in the aftermath of the First World War. With the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the castle lost its function as an imperial residence tied to dynastic rule. Its vast spaces, once shaped to project imperial hierarchy, now stood at the centre of a radically different political experiment. The birth of Czechoslovakia required new symbols of legitimacy and unity. The castle was repurposed as the seat of the presidency, anchoring the young republic in a place deeply embedded in historical memory. Authority was no longer inherited or divinely justified, but rooted in the idea of popular sovereignty and national self-determination. This transition altered how the castle was perceived and used. Ceremonial spaces designed for emperors were adapted for republican governance, diplomacy, and public representation. The architecture remained monumental, but its message changed. Power was now meant to serve the nation rather than dominate it. The presence of a civilian head of state within the castle walls redefined its symbolism. Instead of distant imperial rule, the site came to represent continuity between past and present, linking medieval heritage and modern political ideals. The castle's visibility over the city reinforced its role as a shared national reference point rather than an exclusive seat of elite authority. Cultural meaning also deepened during this period. The castle became associated with intellectual life, state ceremonies, and the articulation of national identity. Its courtyards and halls were no longer reminders of foreign domination, but stages for expressing independence, resilience, and historical continuity. During the years of foreign occupation and authoritarian rule, Prague Castle existed under constant political supervision. Power was imposed upon the site rather than derived from it, turning the castle into a controlled space where authority was enforced through presence, surveillance, and symbolic domination rather than public consent. Under the rule of Nazi Germany, the castle was appropriated as a tool of occupation. Its historic weight was deliberately exploited to project control over the Czech lands, transforming familiar spaces into reminders of subjugation. Flags, guards, and imposed ceremonies reshaped the atmosphere, replacing national meaning with imposed power. Despite this, the castle's deeper symbolism could not be erased. For many Czechs, its silhouette above the city remained a silent witness, rather than a collaborator. Even as it was used to legitimize foreign rule, it continued to embody a longer historical memory that extended far beyond the occupation itself. Following the war, political control took a different form during the communist era. The castle became tightly regulated once again, this time by a domestic regime aligned with ideological conformity. Access, ceremony, and representation were carefully managed to fit the narrative of the state, stripping the site of spontaneous civic meaning. Yet even within this controlled environment, the castle retained its emotional resonance. Its presence in public consciousness could not be fully absorbed by ideology. It stood as a layered monument, carrying meanings accumulated over centuries, that resisted complete reinterpretation or erasure. In the present day, Prague Castle functions as a rare hybrid of past and present. It is not preserved as a frozen monument, but operates as an active centre of state power, hosting the office of the president, while remaining open to the public. Governance and heritage occupy the same space, giving political life a visible historical setting. The castle's role within the modern Czech state is practical as well as symbolic. Official meetings, state ceremonies, and diplomatic events take place within buildings shaped by centuries of history. This continuity reinforces the idea that modern authority is not detached from the past, but grounded in it, drawing legitimacy from long-established institutions and shared memory. At the same time, the complex has become a global destination. As the most visited castle complex in the world, it welcomes millions of visitors each year, turning corridors of power into spaces of public encounter. Tourism has transformed the castle into a living archive, where daily foot traffic connects contemporary audiences with layers of history embedded in stone and space. This coexistence requires careful balance. Security, accessibility, and preservation must work together within a functioning political environment. The presence of state authority has not diminished public engagement. Instead, it reinforces the sense that history here is ongoing rather than concluded. Cultural life also plays a central role. Exhibitions, ceremonies, and public events ensure that the castle is not only observed, but experienced. It serves as a focal point for national identity, education, and international representation, translating historical depth into modern relevance. Through this dual function, the castle embodies continuity without stagnation. It remains a place where history is lived rather than displayed, linking medieval foundations to modern statehood, while standing as an active participant in the political and cultural life of the Czech Republic.